talking about a change in culture possibly at Manchester United, reportedly introducing a Ronaldo rule to ensure no player is paid significantly more than their teammates' salaries, reportedly to be capped at 200 grand a week. Goalkeeper David De Gea could well be the first to be impacted. 375 a week, his deal runs out in the summer. It's thought David De Gea pretty much been given this far lower take it or leave it offer. Is this music to your ears? Are they going in the right direction? Not that anybody will find it not particularly hard, I would have thought, to live off 200k a week.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm all for getting some sort of sanity into salaries so that football clubs can become sustainable and not dependent upon the whims of individuals that run them. They become businesses that can afford to do what they want to do and ultimately make decisions based upon economic security. But if you're Manchester United and you're trying to compete with Manchester City, and Manchester City are paying Kevin De Bruyne £350,000 a week and God knows whoever else what they're paying, then you're going to put yourself in a slightly invidious position. I don't think there's a Ronaldo rule. Ronaldo was always an exception. Ronaldo was a circumstance. Players get paid different salaries. If Manchester United want to cap salaries and want to be the leaders of that particular gang, then chapeau to them. But I suspect they'll soon change their tune if they're not winning football matches and not winning leagues, which they've got acclimatised to now, but not closing the gap. And if the bar is being raised by the clubs that can compete, and £200,000 a week is still a ridiculously significant salary. David De Gea is not going to be given the same contract. David De Gea is probably not going to be at Manchester United at the end of next season, so it's kind of almost an irrelevance.
Not on that money.
Well, not on that money, no, and neither should he be, because he's coming to that point in his career where he can't command top dough because he's no longer the top goalkeeper that Manchester United could possibly acquire. I like the idea that what I consider to be the economic powerhouse of English football that still manages to achieve significant outcomes financially without anywhere near the achievements of the clubs that are winning things, and they're not far away from them. 10% behind Man City that are dominating English football, yet they're only 10% behind them in economic terms, in terms of turnover. But I don't think this will stick. I don't think there's a Ronaldo rule.
Do you want it to stick?
Well, of course I do. I've always advocated for better controls. I think that it is laughable and contemptible to suggest that the governance of English football is how much you're allowed to lose. That's just silly. The industry needs to mature and be a much more economically viable situation, because ultimately the only people that are benefiting from this race to the bottom financially are the players. And whilst you want players to be paid what they're worth, when you start hearing salaries of Mbappe getting £4 million a week, you start to move into the territory of saying this is preposterous.
How can anyone live in that? Dean, when you played, I mean, is there such a thing as dressing room jealousy when it comes to wages? Because under Ed Woodward, the club seemingly happy to break wage structures to bring in big brands like Ronaldo. And then that might have created a bit of a stink with other players. Do other players act up when they hear, you hear what he's on?
Not in front of each other, no. But they will certainly be going to their agent saying, well, hang on, I thought I was the highest paid. And there'll be certain players in any squad that want to be the highest paid. That's why... I don't know whether it's the same now, but at the time when I was playing, I knew that there was players that had in their contract, whoever comes into the club, if they are being paid more than me, my salary goes up. That was...
They had that in their contracts?
Oh, they had that in their contracts.
Where was this
absolutely.
No names, no pack drill, but...
I think most clubs.
At most clubs?
Yeah, most clubs. I think at Norwich they had it, and I think at West Ham they definitely had it.
So if he comes into our club...
Because I had it.
You had it?
I had it at West Ham. Yeah, so if anyone came in on more than me, my salary went up. But no one ever came on.
As a percentage or as a matching of the salary that it came in on?
Well,
exactly. Can't be.
But just being the player, I just had my contract and I never really thought about it. And I think players did come in on more, but it was structured slightly different. And I wanted to ask you this because I'm not very clued up, I would say, in terms of how it works behind the scenes. Obviously, I had an agent that went in and dealt with how it was structured. But say, for example, if Manchester United said, our wage structure is £200,000, and to the public that seems like that is what it is. Mm-hmm. Is it? Or can you get around that by saying a player's on £200,000 a week, but actually we've structured his contract so that bonus is included?
Of course.
It ends up being a lot more than that.
I think it's a message... Right, and a motto. We're listening to Prince Harry warble on about messages and mottos yesterday that have no substance, and I think that's one of those.
It's a matter of time.
Because I think you're in a situation where you have to rely on the marketplace to determine which player. If you're signing a player from AC Milan or from Borussia Dortmund or from wherever Man United want to buy from, and that player's already on £250,000 a week, what are you going to do then? Are you going to exclude him from the equation? Maybe they will. Maybe their sort of buying policy from now on in going forward is not to do that. But if the marketplace for top players is above £200,000 a week, what are Manchester United really saying here? There is no flat policy. There is no definition of everybody gets the same thing. Everybody gets something different. And in an ideal world, what you hope is the Herberts in the dressing room keep their own private contracts to themselves. We all know you don't.
Wait a minute, though. You've been calling for a wage cap for a while.
I have.
Now seemingly United are doing it, and you're saying, nah, they won't be able to do it.
What I'm looking at is the reality of how you control the percentage of turnover. What I've always advocated for is a wage cap that's related to turnover. So if Manchester United's turnover is 500 million quid a year, and I suggest that a wage cap should be 70%, then chapeau to Man United, they can spend 350 million quid, and how they cut that cloth is up to them. If Palace's turnover is 200 million pounds a year, then their wage ratio should be 140 million. They cut their cloth accordingly. And what football clubs come out of it with is a sustainable position, that players are getting paid well, football clubs are operated on an economic footing which is sensible, and people aren't breaking the bank to be able to just give one beneficiary, which is players, all the money in the room.
So can we believe when we read in any report, oh, he's on 150 grand a week? Can we believe that, or actually could there be behind that a structure?
Depends who's telling it to you.
Yeah,
depends who's telling it to you. You know, ultimately, Manchester United are a PLC. So they're a business that will have far more visibility and far more transparency about their policies than other people. Yeah. So they'll be if they don't do what they say they're going to do, they'll be more evident than, say, someone else that runs a football club in a completely different way that isn't as accountable to reporting processes as a PLC is.
How did your agent Dean find out what another incoming player at your football club was earning?
He probably didn't, but at the time, that's how I felt when I signed my sort of last contract at West Ham before I then had to retire.
Who was your agent?
It was my uncle, actually. Because I had a lot of agents ring my house when I was younger. My dad wasn't necessarily really clued up on football. I mean, Kenny Dalglish rang our house once, and he didn't know who he was, and told him to not ring the house again. You know, I think Kenny was working alongside an agency at the time.
What?
I know.
He could have gone to Liverpool.
I don't think it was about Liverpool, to be honest. But I just think at that time there was a lot of agents ringing the house phone. You know, for example. So we didn't know who to trust, and it's hard for players in that sense. I think as players mainly, you want it to be dealt with, and if it comes back and you think, oh, well, I'm the highest paid here. Brilliant. Especially as a striker.
If I'd run your uncle rather than Dario Guardi, then I'd have got a better outcome, would I?
I think so.
But do you think? Did you feel more reassured, more comfortable, Dean, that a family member was in charge of your finances?
I obviously did, but it wasn't just that he was my uncle. He had a master's in contractual law as well, which did certainly help things, and then obviously passed the agency tests as well.
So in his own right, he quite rightly could do the job. That you rail against that. You don't think family should be involved with players? I have mixed emotions
against it, because when you were hanging around with Neymar Senior in Qatar, I was like, well, you're living vicariously off your son. What are you? You are actually being benefited in life solely on your son. Surely it should be the other way around. The father's there to provide for the son, not the son to provide for the father.
But the son wanted the father to
So
represent
I understand
him.
that. So then the other side of my argument is who can you trust more than your own family? So I get that. But being the person that's got to write that bleeding check out to that member of the family, I'd be sat there going, well, what am I paying you for? I'd rather pay nobody. I'd rather have to do a deal that makes sense to everybody, and not necessarily. I'd rather your son or your nephew paid you, and he'd say, "Well, I'd rather the club pay you because I don't want to pay for anything." That's how the football world works. But I rail against it because I don't like sons. I don't like the corruption that can come from it. I don't like football clubs that throw houses at people and their parents to be able to get their son to sign a football contract. And we all know that's gone on in previous incarnations with Paul Stretford or whoever else that signed Wayne Rooney and so on and so forth. So I look at those things and I say, I don't like that. But it's part and parcel of the world of football. And on the other side of my argument, which is where I'm sort of balancing it, is I do understand that for a young man with these bloody agents, you don't know which advice is the best advice. The only thing I'd like to see is the players pay their own fees. And that's the thing I can never square. The agents never work for the owner of a football club. His agent worked for him, but you never paid him. The club paid him.
So you would never have done a Kevin De Bruyne, Dean? You'd never have sat down and negotiated a deal yourself?
No, because I wouldn't have felt that I was, I suppose I would say, clever enough to deal with the wording of a contract. But
that's fine, and you don't have to be. but you should pay him.
Oh,
When
yeah,
you sell
of
your
course,
house,
of course,
you pay an estate agent.
Yeah.
But when it comes to football, you don't.
No, well,
you get an agent to get you a better deal.
Yeah, players would love to go in there and say to the club, "Can you pay an extra chunk so that it covers the agent's fees?" Of course, as a player, you would go in, and you probably wouldn't think twice about that.
So you don't have a problem with Dean paying his uncle to do his deals, but you have a problem with you having to pay his uncle to do Dean's deal.
Well, yeah, why wouldn't I? Because ultimately, why would I pay someone that can negotiate a worse deal for me and then tell me he works for me? How does that work? I can get Dean to pay for me for 10 grand a week. You can get him to pay me for 12. Why would I then pay you on top?
Listen,
Thanks very much for your help.
In all seriousness, Simon, if United are onto this, and it is something of a salary cap, this can only be a good thing, because other clubs might follow.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's only a certain amount of clubs that are going to be at the top end of £200,000 a week anyway. So you're only talking about the top 6 clubs. You're not talking about, there's going to be exceptions that people like Wilfried Zaha that are £130,000, £150,000 a week at Palace, but they're the exception, not the rule. Most football clubs outside of the top 6 wouldn't dream of having a top end salary of £200,000 a week, would they? No. So we're talking about 6 clubs, and those clubs don't have a problem with their turnover to waste rate. They're not running at 95%. Yeah. Chelsea are not running at 95% of turnover. Neither are Man City. Yeah. Neither are Liverpool. Neither are Arsenal. They're all running at a 70% ratio anyway. So they're not the ones I'm looking out for. Sure. It's the other ones I'm looking out for.
Here's a nice message from Dean's uncle. God, the weather's great here in the Cayman Islands. Coming up to 11:45.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.